Welcome to episode 18 of the Ask the Law Firm Seller Show. My name is Jeremy Poock and I lead Senior Attorney Match. In today's Ask Show, we'll have two segments, a Q&A segment where we'll address three questions, and today's Poock's Post as our second segment. So let's jump right into segment one, our Q&A. What's our first question today? Our first question today is, I'm considering selling my law firm. What are my options? Okay, as we see it, in our experience, there's really three options when it comes to senior attorneys considering selling their law firms. And let's just put a definition around senior attorneys. That is, attorneys that have practiced for more than 30 years. And by and large, these are attorneys that have run and operated and grown what we call small business law firms. That is your rainmaker attorney or attorneys that have developed law firms that have several lawyers, up to 20 or more even lawyers, several $1,000,000 in revenues or below. And their question, and what we're addressing right now, is what are their options? What's the option for selling a law firm? And there's really three options. The first option is what we call the preferred option. And that option is to join a growing law firm. The second option is to structure an internal succession plan. That is, an internal lawyer at your firm who could take over the practice. That's the potential option. And the third option, what we call the risky option, which is maintaining the status quo. So let's look at that first option, that preferred option of joining a growing law firm. When it comes to the options for selling your law firm, the preferred option is to join a growing law firm. And the reason why is because growing law firms want and need what senior attorney-led firms have. And those are really three particular resources that senior attorneys have and senior attorney-led firms have that growing law firms want and need. First and foremost is new clients, that book of business. The energy source of all law firms is clients, and senior attorneys over the course of their careers, they've developed a book of business, they have clients and referral sources, and it's exactly what growing law firms need as the energy source to continue growing their firms. The second resource that senior attorney-led firms offer is an experienced workforce. That is to do the work. If we've got the energy source of the clients, well, we need a factory, an engine. Who's going to actually do the work? That's the senior attorney, additional attorneys at senior attorney-led firms, and also support staff. That experienced workforce is what growing law firms want and need as well to be able to crank out the sophisticated legal work that a selling firm brings in terms of that book of business to clients. And then third, because here we are in the mid-2020s, what is it that growing law firms also want and need? Digital content. Today's consumers for legal services, i.e. clients, they are bypassing by and large yesteryear's rainmakers, and they're going straight to Uncle Google. They are searching on Google and additional social media platforms for attorneys and law firms to retain and to get the attention of today's legal consumers, those clients that you want, those new clients that you want for your law firms. Growing firms need digital content, and senior attorneys and the attorneys at their firms are literally sitting on treasure chests of digital content that those growing law firms need to get the attention of would-be clients to come to their firms. Hence, the preferred option when senior attorney-led firms are considering to whom to sell their law firms is growing law firms because they want and need what senior attorney-led firms have. Now let's look at the second option. The second option, what we call the potential option, when it comes to the options for selling a law firm is an internal sale. That is your senior associate, your junior partner, or if you're even thinking of recruiting in an attorney to be able to work at your firm and to take over the practice. We call that the potential option because by and large, what we see in our experience is that there's really four false expectations that potential option is built upon. That is, we assume that an internal successor, a key employee lawyer, at a senior attorney-led firm, we assume, or senior attorneys assume, that they are going to want to shift at some point from being a key employee lawyer to becoming a law firm owner. And here's really the four reasons why that doesn't happen. First and foremost is that senior attorneys at some point hired their key employee lawyers because they needed to hire a lawyer to fulfill a job. Well, those lawyers that joined your firm, they also had an expectation that they were being hired to do a job. They wanted a job then, and they really only want a job now. Second is that your key employee lawyers, they went to law school and not to business school. They want, by and large, to practice law, to practice the profession, their trade, and not in terms of had they gone to business school and be entrepreneurial, that they want to aspire to own and grow the firm that their bosses built. They just went to law school and not to business school. The third reason why your internal key employee lawyer doesn't want to purchase your practice is they just can't afford to. They've got so many other expenses going on in their lives. They're paying for their home mortgages. Heck, they're still paying down their student debt. They're starting to save for their own retirement. They've got their monthly expenses. They're thinking about the next big vacation they want to take their family on. Heck, the second home they would love to be able to afford. And when they are thinking about buying their boss's law firm, it's often just a bridge too far. They just can't afford it. And then lastly, for whatever reason, and we see this a lot in the marketplace, is that key employee lawyers, they just assume that their boss is never going to retire, right? Boss is the first one to get to the office in the morning, last one often to leave, is generating all of the business, pays all of the bills. It's just easier to assume that, heck, my boss is never going to retire anyhow, so I don't even need to think about purchasing the practice. Hence, it is the potential option we just don't see very often in the marketplace, that your key employee lawyers are going to turn the switch on from key employee to business owner and offer to purchase their boss's law practice. And then there's the third option. The third option The third option that senior attorneys have when it comes to selling their law firms is really like not a full-fledged option, but many senior attorneys pursue this one, which is to maintain your status quo, right? That is, by not selling, okay, in some respects, it is a form of sale because we have to think about value, right? We want to sell something. We will, of course, want to sell at a higher value. And what we're seeing, particularly now that we are in what we call the 3.0 digital era, that is post 2020, laws and industry finally caught up digitally. The digital disruption has entered into our industry. And by maintaining the status quo of assuming that today is going to be like yesterday and tomorrow is going to be like today, what we are seeing among senior attorney-led firms is that their short-term revenues are actually going down. The short-term revenues, that is year over year revenues, are going down because they're just not generating as much new business as they did in that word of mouth era. And by not keeping up digitally and investing in digital marketing, they're generating less clients, hence less revenue in the status quo. Also in status quo, there's a significant risk of what we call a Random Tuesday event. And a Random Tuesday event comes in a couple of flavors. One, less severe, is if a key employee lawyer actually leaves your firm, right? Leaves the firm, and that person has left. That person might have generated a ton of billable hours or other forms of revenue for your firm. So you lose revenues immediately as a result of key employee lawyer leaving your firm. Sometimes key employee lawyers, when they leave on a Random Tuesday, after just a 2 or 4 week notice, after having practiced at your firm for years, sometimes they may actually take key clients with them as well. That impacts the value of the practice as well. The more severe version of a Random Tuesday event is, God forbid, there's a physical or mental health issue with the senior attorney owner of the firm, or premature death. And what we find there is that because of the need for senior attorneys to transition their clients, what we call trust transfer in any law firm sale, they're transferring the trust of their clients to a successor firm. Well, if a senior attorney is not available to transfer that trust of the clients to any successor, including an internal or via joining a growing law firm, the value of the firm just plummets. And that is absolutely a risk in status quo of that type of Random Tuesday event. Now let's look at really what I'll call a fourth option. Okay, I know we said before there's only three. But there is a fourth option associated with status quo. Okay, in the status quo for those lawyers and law firms that don't necessarily want to pursue an internal sale or join a growing law firm, another option as part of status quo is to consider referring your clients to lawyers at trusted law firms. Many lawyers do not take enough advantage of Rule 1.5, the professional rules of conduct, in their given state's jurisdiction. Rule 1.5, as most lawyers know, is a rule that permits fee sharing when lawyers refer clients to a lawyer or lawyers at another law firm, and the referring attorney receives a referral fee in consideration for the referral. And typically, a given state's version of Rule 1.5, the client needs to be notified that a referral fee is being paid. Well, for those lawyers that want to maintain their status quo and want to work less, an option when it comes to selling your law firm is to begin referring matters to trusted lawyers at one or more firms. It is a way to monetize the practice without having to sell the practice, still maintains the issue in the status quo of a random Tuesday event. Something, God forbid, happens to the senior attorney, and that senior attorney is not able to refer his or her clients to lawyers at another firm. They're not going to realize the value of their practices. And as we consider the status quo and the risks associated with it, one way to mitigate against the risk of status quo is to consider, particularly for those attorneys that want to work less, to consider taking advantage of Rule 1.5 and refer matters to lawyers at other firms in consideration for referral fees that you can negotiate on a case-by-case type basis. Okay, so for our second question today. Our second question today is, what is my law firm worth? Okay, that's the question that is on the mind of hundreds, thousands of senior attorneys and senior attorney-led firms is, what is the value of my law firm? And what we see is that law firms really have 5 components of value. Those 5 components of value consist of the client list and referral source list. Taken together, that's the book of business of a senior attorney-led firm. The additional, what we call value chips, are the goodwill of a given attorney, law firm, lawyers at the firm in their state, region, nationally, sometimes even internationally, the subject matter knowledge that lawyers in a law firm has developed in typically several practice areas, and more post 2020, it's the digital value that firms are starting to develop in terms of their investments into multi-channel digital media. And just so that the viewer or listener knows what we're talking about here of the value of law firms, we're talking about law firms as small business owned law firms. That is, law firms that have one or more rainmaker attorneys that are now senior attorneys. They have practiced for more than 30 years and they're considering succession planning for their practices. Those are the types of firms that we are addressing now in terms of those 5 components of the value of their practices. Now let's look at, how did they develop that value over the course often of decades? Today's senior attorney-led firms, when it comes to the value of their practices, the primary value of their practices is their book of business. And that book of business consists of clients and referral sources. And for today's senior attorney-led firms, they've built up the value of their books of business often over the course of several decades. And they did so, what we call really the hard way, during the pre-Google era, the word of mouth era. And during that era, we all remember that we were handing out hundreds, if not thousands, of business cards over the course of a given year at multiple in-person type networking meetings. There was non-digital thought leadership of writing articles in newspapers and journals, in-person CLEs, event sponsorships, taking out ads and ad books, and then advertising, pre-Y2K type advertising, the yellow pages, white pages, newspapers, again, journals, sometimes on TV and radio as well. And over the course of literally blood, sweat, and tears of that word of mouth rainmaking that today's senior attorneys did for literally decades. They built up that book of business of clients and referral sources. Now let's look in terms of the value of a senior attorney led firm. What's the consideration that's paid on the value of that practice? So, the primary value components of today's senior attorney led firms is the client list and referral source list. That is the book of business. How is the book of business paid for? By a buyer. Who is that typical buyer? What we find in the marketplace is the typical buyer is a growing law firm, because growing law firms, they want and need the clients and referral sources, that book of business of senior attorney led firms. The consideration that is typically paid in what we call law firm sales 1.0 on that book of business is earnout terms. That is, a growing law firm will agree to pay a percentage of the revenues that are derived from the defined book of business of a senior attorney led firm over a negotiated number of years. Hence, the larger the book of business, the more valuable the practice. The more valuable the practice, the higher amount of that monetization of the firm as a result of the earnout payment terms paid over a negotiated number of years. We have to recognize, though, that we are now in the mid 2020s. Now that we are in the mid 2020s, there was a seismic shift in the legal industry in 2020. It had started pre 2020, of course, but as we all know, that one word that came out of 2020 beyond just COVID-19, okay, when it comes to the economics of what happened in 2020 is pivot. And in 2020 and since then, the clients, as they are searching for lawyers today in the mid 2020s, there's an ongoing shift in the client's behavior when they're searching for lawyers, because clients today are searching for their lawyers online. They are going to Google. They want to visit attorneys' websites. They're getting to the websites from Google, and they're getting to the websites from searching and reviewing materials and information on multiple social media platforms. And if senior attorney lawyers and senior attorney led firms are not investing in multi-channel digital media and attracting clients in this new digital era, we call the 3.0 digital era for law firms, as having an impact on that all important book of business. Right? The value of a senior attorney led firm is based upon the value of the book of business. And here in the mid 2020s, for senior attorney led firms that are not attracting new clients digitally, and for those senior attorneys whose referral sources are often similarly aged as those attorneys, that is, their referral sources are often in their late 50s, 60s, even 70s, and have started to retire. Well, if senior attorney led firms are not replenishing their books of business as much as they did in yesteryear, that book of business is actually going to become less valuable. So now let's look at the impact of a less valuable book of business. What is that having on the value of a law firm? If you're not replenishing your book of business as much as you did in yesteryear, that is, that your book of business does not have as many new clients, new referral sources to be adding on to the book of business that you've developed over the course of your career, then the value of your practice and what we call law firm sales 1.0 type sales actually is going to go down, because the value of those practices depends on, from a buyer's standpoint, depends upon the revenues that are derived from the senior attorney led firm's book of business. And if you don't have as deep and as thick of a book of business in the mid 2020s and beyond, because you're not developing as much new business as you did in the pre-Google word of mouth era, then the value of your practice will unfortunately go down. But here's some really good news for any senior attorney that is considering to sell their law practice, as senior attorneys are considering selling their law practices, the ideal, what we call the preferred buyer, is a growing law firm, because growing law firms, they need the book of business of senior attorney led firms. They also need the experienced workforce that senior attorney led firms present, those key employee lawyers and experienced support staff. And more now that we're in the mid 2020s and we're in what we call that 3.0 digital era for the legal industry, growing law firms need the digital content that senior attorney led firms have in treasure troves. So when it comes to how do I value my law firm, ideally, senior attorneys want to be considering or want to sell their law practices when their five components of value are all in the green. That is, when their client list and referral source list is green, their book of business is filled. They've developed great goodwill, they've got tremendous subject matter knowledge that they've developed over the course of their careers, and they've developed and are continuing to develop digital value. For those senior attorneys who are not investing in digital value. So that is for those senior attorneys that are not investing in multi-channel digital marketing and in increasing the value of the digital side of their practice by having a presence on Google, by investing in multi-channel digital marketing, their client list and referral source list will decrease in value, but that does not mean that your law firm does not have value, particularly to a growing law firm. This is dissimilar from what Uber did to the taxi cab medallion industry and what Netflix did to Blockbuster. For senior attorney-led firms, absolutely there is digital disruption in the marketplace today. You still have a book of business. Even if that book of business may be decreasing, the value of your practice still presents great value to growing law firms that want and need what you have, in particular that book of business. But as that book of business continues to decrease, though, we have to keep in mind that your practice will become less valuable over time. Okay, so for today's third question, our third question is, what is the Next Step workshop? So here we want to describe one of the first parts of what Senior Attorney Match offers to clients is our Next Step workshop. When senior attorneys contact Senior Attorney Match and they have questions about what is my law practice worth, who would want to purchase my law firm, when can I retire, what do I do if I'm considering retirement? Our Next Step workshop is a means for senior attorneys and additional attorneys at their firms to learn about what their practices are worth. And what we're showing here is what we talk about with our clients in the Next Step workshop, which is typically 90 minutes. We learn about the background of our clients. How did you build your practice? How do you differentiate your practice? Where do the revenues come in for your practice? Who are the key lawyers and support staff at your practices? What is it that you really enjoy doing as a lawyer? Most senior attorneys, they don't want to retire right away. They want to continue practicing, but they really want to stop managing their practice. And we learn about that in the Next Step workshop. In addition to learning about the preferences and what they dislike, we talk about what are your goals? Like, what are your goals both for the office and what are your goals outside of the office? Right now that we're removed, thank God, several years from COVID had a huge impact on just our perspective generally. Okay, and what we find among senior attorneys is this realization that we can't get time back. So when we talk with attorneys that are considering succession planning for their practices, we ask them, what are your goals outside of the office? Do you want to travel more? Do you want to start a totally different business? Do you want to just do certain things in the law practice? So we discuss those goals. And then very importantly, in that workshop, what senior attorneys are asking us is, what are my options? Okay, I want to sell my law firm. Can I sell my law firm internally? Who would want to purchase my law firm if it was a growing law firm? What if I stayed in my status quo and just didn't make any changes for X number of months or often for years? And then we discuss, what are your risks right? What are the risks associated with the goals you want to achieve and the options that you have, all within a time frame of here we are in the date of the next step workshop, and when is it that you ideally want to retire or sell your law firm? And then finally in the workshop, we talk about what are your priorities in terms of, do you want to become free from your law practice, or do you want to monetize it to the greatest extent possible? It's often not an either or question. Every senior attorney we meet with, they come out differently, almost like a seesaw of, okay, I would love to become free from the practice and just be done with it. And others say, you know what, I haven't fully saved for retirement yet. I need to monetize this to the greatest extent possible. In that next step workshop, literally over the course of 90 minutes, we delve into learning what it is that you have, who wants it, what are your options, what are your goals, and what are the risks associated with achieving your goals and fulfilling your preferred option within the time frame that you want in terms of when you can semi-retire, fully retire, and sell your law firm. Okay, so for today's Pook's post, we'll address that key employee lawyers do not want to purchase their boss's law firm because dot dot dot. So many senior attorneys, when they contact Senior Attorney Match, they say that they would love nothing more than to sell, transfer the practice to their key employee lawyers. And we share with them that they just often do not want to purchase your law firm. And there's four what we call false expectations, but then there's an even deeper reason beyond that that we'll get into in just a moment. But when it comes to those four false expectations about why it is that your key employee lawyers, why they really don't want to purchase your law firm, is because they just want a job, right? You hire them as key employee lawyers, you hire them as employees, then they want to remain as employees. They went to law school and not to business school. They just can't afford to purchase your practice because they've got so many other expenses going on in their lives, and to think about how they can afford, let alone how they would wind up paying the consideration for their boss's law firm, it's just not in the cards often for key employee lawyers because they just can't afford to. And then lastly, in terms of these false expectations about why your key employee lawyers just don't want to purchase your practice, they just for whatever reason assume that the boss is never going to retire. Now let's look at that deeper reason. Okay, in terms of the reason why it is that key employee lawyers do not want to purchase their bosses, the senior attorney-led firm, from the senior attorney owner, is because by and large, key employee lawyers want to maintain a reliable, predictable, and safe job. We call this the RPS meter, actually. That is, a reliable, predictable, and safe job is really, if we think about it in terms of a meter of the job being RPS, reliable, predictable, and safe. And that is typically what we find the mindset of your key employee lawyers. So when you hire them, they're excited to join you. You're excited that that they joined you as well. And that RPS meter is in the green. Okay, that is, they are unlikely to look for another job because they've got a reliable, predictable, and safe job. Now let's look at when a senior attorney owner of a law firm is about 2 to 4 years out from retiring. Often at that point is just sort of hinting at, I'm 70 now. At 73, I may want to retire. I'm 59 now. I'm thinking at 65, I'm going to retire. At that point, that RPS meter for the key employee lawyers, they're starting to think about getting another job because, again, their mentality is a job mentality, and they're wondering about, is their job going to continue with the senior attorney-led firm, continue to be reliable, predictable, and safe? And then what happens when a senior attorney announces plans to retire? At that point, even though the senior attorney would love for their key employee lawyer to say, wow, this is the time for me to step up and say, I want to purchase your business. Well, let's remember the RPS meter. Okay. What happens when senior attorney announces the plans that he or she is going to retire? Well, that meter goes immediately to red, right? That is, their reliable, predictable, and safe job has just become unreliable, unpredictable, and unsafe. And it really leads to three choices as a result. The first choice is actually what we call a non-choice. That is because of those four false expectations, because the key employee lawyers that work with senior attorneys, they don't want to purchase your practice and they can't afford to either. Well, by and large, that first choice of purchasing the firm is just off the table because they don't want to and they can't afford to purchase their boss's law firm. So that then leads to choice number two and choice number three. Choice number two is really the knee jerk of your key employee lawyer, which is to start looking for another job. And let's look at why. When it comes to that second choice, in terms of why it is that your key employee lawyers, when senior attorneys announce that they're considering to retire, why is it that their knee jerk is that they're interested in looking for another job? The reason why is because they want and need to maintain that RPS, that reliable, predictable, and safe job. And their knee jerk is that if their senior attorney boss is no longer going to maintain their RPS meter, then their best option is to consider joining a third party law firm altogether, which really has terrible results for the senior attorneys, because a senior attorney who owns his or her law firm and now their key employee lawyer whose RPS meter went into the red has left on only 2 or 4 weeks notice. Well, what happens to the senior attorney in that instance? They really have three losses, right? You've lost your key employee lawyer, okay, who would be cranking out all types of billable work at your firm, could potentially lose clients when they leave to go to a third party law firm. And the third loss is, rather than hope that your key employee lawyers would take over the firm, well, instead, now you're postponing your retirement by years often because you've got to fill in the slack of what those key employee lawyer or lawyers had done, let alone try to recruit in another lawyer to replace that key employee lawyer who left because they wanted that to restore that reliable, predictable, and safe job. Now let's look at option number three, right? Choice number three, when senior attorneys announce that they are going to retire. Well, we know that the key employee lawyers, that they don't want to purchase your firm. They can't afford to. We also know that their knee jerk is probably to start looking for a job. Well, the third option is, what and how could it look like if the entire team joins a growing law firm? And that's an option that we recommend to almost every senior attorney that we meet with who has key employee lawyers. That is, we explain that your key employee lawyers, they don't want to purchase your firm. They can't afford to either. A growing law firm, they want and need your key employee lawyers because they often, that is a growing law firm, of course they want your book of business, but they often don't have the capacity to do the work that your book of business produces. Hence, growing law firms, they absolutely want and need your key employee lawyers. And when key employee lawyers join growing law firms together with senior attorney owners, that really presents three wins, right? That presents a win for the senior attorney who can now retire and be able to monetize the practice. It's a huge win for those key employee lawyers. They want their RPS meter to be in the green. By joining a growing law firm, that RPS meter absolutely goes into the green because they've got that reliable, predictable, and safe job with the growing law firm that they've joined, together with their senior attorney boss who also joins the growing firm to fulfill the succession planning wants, needs, and desires of the senior attorney owner of the firm. And the third win is for the clients, right? Like, we want clients to have continuous representation. And when the entire team joins a growing law firm, it's a huge win for the clients as well. And really, there's a fourth winner, of course, which is the growing law firms, because growing law firms are thinking to themselves all the time, how do we grow our firm? How do we get more clients? How do we get more talented staff? Lawyers and non-lawyers. And when senior attorneys, when they're thinking about retiring and you've got key employee lawyers, we highly recommend that you really consider joining a growing law firm that wants the entire team and the wins associated with doing so. And that is episode 18 of the Ask the Law Firm Seller Show.